Curiosity began it all. The kind that hums low in a man's chest when the wind changes, when something unseen stirs on the horizon. That morning, Clayton Hale felt it before he even reached town, the faint tug of something waiting beyond his understanding. The sun had barely risen over the white plains, a pale disk behind a curtain of falling snow. The world was hushed, the only sounds his horse's steady hooves and the soft jingle of tack. He rode alone, as he had for years, wrapped in silence and solitude. Mercy Creek sat quiet under a blanket of winter. Smoke rose slow from a few chimneys, shop windows fogged with warmth. Clayton rode past the church, the blacksmith's shop, the shuttered boarding house. He wasn't a man given to company. Even in town, people nodded with respect but kept their distance. He was known for his wealth, his land, his discipline, but not for his words. He came for supplies, flour, nails, lamp oil. Nothing more. Yet something about that morning, the strange stillness, the whisper of the snow, made him pause outside Lark's bakery. He swung down from his horse, brushing frost from his coat. The smell of fresh bread wrapped around him, rich and comforting, a small reminder that not everything in winter had to feel lonely. Then he saw her. At first, she was barely a shape, huddled against the bakery wall, wrapped in a shawl so thin the wind went straight through it. But when she lifted her head, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. Her eyes, wide and gray-green like melted frost, met his with a quiet desperation that didn't beg, it pleaded for dignity. She was young, maybe 24, but her face carried the exhaustion of someone twice that age. Snow clung to her lashes. Her lips trembled when she tried to speak, but no words came. Clayton had seen hunger before, in the faces of men after bad seasons, in the eyes of stray dogs by his fence, but not like this. Hers was a hunger layered with heartbreak. He stepped closer. "You all right, miss?" She blinked, as if startled by the sound of kindness. Her hands, red with cold, clutched the edge of her shawl. "Just hungry," she whispered. "Don't want trouble. I'll work for bread if there's work." Before he could answer, Mrs. Lark, the baker's wife, appeared in the doorway, dusted in flour. "She's been sittin' there since yesterday," the woman said softly. "Asked for scraps. Poor thing's about to freeze." Clayton glanced between them. Around the square, townsfolk passed with hurried steps, careful not to meet the beggar's eyes. Pity was easy, action was another matter. He reached into his coat and pulled a coin from his pocket, but the woman, Evelyn as Mrs. Lark had called her earlier, shook her head. "No charity," she murmured. "Please. Just bread for work." Her voice was small but steady. He studied her for a moment longer, the hollow of her cheeks, the proud set of her chin, and something unspoken shifted inside him. Without another word, he stepped into the bakery, bought 2 loaves, and returned. He tore one in half and offered it to her. "You can start with this," he said. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, light as snow. She hesitated, then ate slowly, almost reverently. Around them, the town moved on, uninterested. Only Clayton stood still, caught between curiosity and something deeper, something he hadn't felt since boyhood, before the world taught him silence. When she finished, she looked up again, eyes clearer now. "You shouldn't waste your kindness on me," she said. "I won't be anyone's burden." He smiled faintly. "You're not." They stood there a moment, the wind sighing around them, the smell of bread and wood smoke binding them in a fragile peace. But soon, reality intruded. The sky darkened, the snow thickened. Clayton turned toward his horse, but his thoughts lingered on her trembling form. Logic told him to ride home. He owed her nothing. Yet his heart, stubborn as the land he worked, whispered otherwise. "Where are you staying?" he asked. She laughed softly, without humor. "Nowhere that keeps the cold out." That was all it took. He motioned toward his horse. "Come with me. You'll freeze if you stay." Evelyn hesitated, eyes wary. In her world, men's offers often came with hidden costs. But something in his voice, quiet, steady, absent of demand, disarmed her. She nodded. He helped her mount, his hand firm but gentle on her arm, and they rode out of Mercy Creek together, two strangers leaving behind the judgmental hush of a town too small for compassion. The journey was long and wordless. Snow muffled the sound of the world. Even the horses' hooves sank silently into the white drifts. Evelyn kept her gaze fixed ahead, the wind biting her face, her shawl fluttering like a ghost behind her. She wanted to speak, to ask who this man was, why he'd bothered, but the rhythm of his quiet strength made words unnecessary. By dusk, the outline of the Hale ranch appeared on the horizon, acres of fenced land, barns half buried in snow, a house standing like a fortress of solitude. She stared at it with disbelief. No one had ever brought her to safety before. Inside, warmth enveloped her like a forgotten dream. The fire cracked, casting gold light on timber walls. Clayton hung his hat, his movements slow, deliberate. "You can stay here till the storm passes," he said. "There's stew on the stove. Eat. Rest." She looked at him as if waiting for the rest, for the price, the expectation, but none came. Only that same calm patience. She sank into a chair, tears burning her eyes before she could stop them. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then busied himself tending the fire. In the flickering light, she studied him, the worn coat, the scar along his jaw, the eyes that seemed to see without probing. A man used to silence, but not cruelty. As she ate, she began to speak, not all at once, but in fragments. Her mother's death, the promise of work that turned false, the miles walked in freezing wind. Each word seemed to lighten her burden. He listened, saying little, but his quiet was not empty. It was steady ground beneath her trembling story. When she finished, he poured her water and said, "You're safe here, Evelyn." It was the first time he'd spoken her name. She felt it settle into her like warmth spreading through cold bones. Safe. She hadn't heard that word in years. Later, when she lay in the small room he'd offered, staring at the wooden beams above, she could still hear the fire crackling in the other room, could still feel the echo of his calm presence through the walls. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since her mother's passing, she drifted into sleep without fear. Downstairs, Clayton sat by the hearth, hat in his hands. Snow whispered against the window panes. He hadn't meant to bring anyone home. He built his life to avoid just that. Yet the image of her face in the snow kept replaying in his mind, soft as a prayer. Outside, the storm grew heavier. Inside, a strange peace settled between two souls who had nothing to give but the smallest act of mercy. And somehow, that mercy felt like the beginning of everything neither of them had dared hope for. Morning came soft and silver, the storm having spent itself against the windows of the Hale ranch. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the world beyond the frosted glass glimmered white and untouched. Evelyn woke to the quiet hum of the place, the distant sound of boots on wooden floors, the rhythm of a man who belonged entirely to his work. She rose slowly, every movement careful, as though afraid to disturb the peace she'd stumbled into. The small room was plain but warm, clean blankets, a sturdy chair, a washbasin half full of water. Mercy like this was something she'd never known, and it unsettled her as much as it comforted her. When she stepped into the kitchen, Clayton was already there. He stood by the stove, sleeves rolled, coffee steaming in a tin mug beside him. He looked up briefly, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Mornin'," he said. Evelyn nodded, clutching her shawl tighter. "You didn't have to keep me," she murmured. "I'll be gone as soon as the weather clears." He poured her coffee without answering right away, then set it gently in front of her. "Storm's not done yet," he said. "Road'll be ice till noon, maybe longer. No use rushin' into the cold." His voice carried no insistence, only fact, and she found herself sitting without protest. The fire snapped, throwing gold light across the worn table. For a long time, neither spoke. It was a silence filled not with discomfort but with the tentative weight of something beginning, fragile, uncertain, real. Days passed. The snow lingered, and with it, Evelyn. What began as a temporary refuge turned into a strange rhythm of shared quiet. She helped where she could, washing dishes, mending shirts, sweeping the floor. He never asked it of her, but she couldn't bear to feel useless. In return, Clayton fixed a draft in her room, left a pair of wool gloves by the door, and showed her how to use the wood stove. Every act was simple, but each carried an unspoken grace. The townsfolk noticed. On his next trip into Mercy Creek, whispers followed him like wind through dry grass. The baker's wife lowered her voice when she spoke his name. A rancher like him, they said, taking in a beggar woman? Foolish. Dangerous. Clayton said nothing in his defense. He never did. He bought his supplies, tipped his hat, and rode home through the cold with the weight of their judgment pressing on his back. Evelyn knew the gossip had reached him when he came in that evening quieter than usual, his jaw set, his eyes distant. She said nothing, but as they ate by lamplight, she finally asked, "Do they hate me that much?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "They don't know you," he said softly. "And folks fear what they don't understand." That night, she wept quietly when he couldn't see. Not for their cruelty, but because his kindness was harder to bear. She had lived too long expecting to be abandoned, and now she found herself praying she wouldn't be. Winter deepened, and with it came small transformations either could name. She began to laugh sometimes, just little bursts when his horse sneezed or when the stew boiled over. He'd watch her then, pretending not to, his lips twitching with the hint of a smile. She started humming while she worked, her voice light as birdsong. The house, once empty of sound, began to breathe again, but still, a distance lingered. He kept his words measured, his gaze averted too quickly. She carried gratitude like a shield, afraid of reading too much into every kindness. The ranch was peaceful, but beneath the peace lay the question neither dared speak: what were they to each other? That answer came one evening when the wind rose sharp against the windows, carrying with it the voice of danger. One of Clayton's ranch hands, a man named Burke, stumbled into the yard drunk and slurring. He'd lost his wages gambling and come looking for trouble, bitterness dripping from his tongue. Evelyn had stepped outside to fetch firewood when he cornered her near the barn. His laughter was cruel, the kind that scraped against her skin. "So this is what the boss keeps out here," Burke sneered. "A beggar with a pretty face. Must be nice, you're nean bred that way." Evelyn froze, fear and shame twisting inside her. Before she could speak, a heavy shadow fell across the snow. Clayton stood at the barn door, his voice low and steady. "That's enough." Burke turned, sneering, but the look in Clayton's eyes stopped him cold. The silence stretched thin as wire. Finally, Burke spat into the snow. "She'll ruin you. Everyone's already talking. You can't save a woman like that." Clayton's jaw tightened. For years, he'd lived apart to avoid conflict, to keep his world clean and ordered. But at that moment, something inside him hardened into certainty. "She's my wife," he said evenly, the words ringing through the cold like iron. Burke's face faltered, disbelief flashing before he turned away. The door slammed, his footsteps fading into the storm. Evelyn stood trembling, her breath visible in the dark. "You didn't have to say that," she whispered. Clayton met her eyes. "I meant it." The words hung between them, fragile as glass. Neither moved. Snow swirled around them, glowing in the lantern light. Finally, he stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a touch so gentle it made her heart ache. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said. Inside, the fire burned low. They stood in its glow, two people who had spent their lives waiting for something they didn't believe they deserved. And in the stillness that followed, Evelyn realized she was no longer a guest in his home. She was part of it, woven into its warmth, its quiet, its heartbeat. The days after that moved differently. The ranch seemed brighter, though the snow still fell. They shared small smiles, laughter over breakfast, quiet moments by the fire. He taught her to ride his gentlest horse. She taught him to listen to the wind instead of fighting it. Mercy Creek still whispered, but neither of them cared. When spring finally came, It brought color back to the land, patches of green, the call of distant birds. Evelyn stood one morning at the edge of the pasture, watching sunlight spill over the fields. Clayton came up behind her, his coat unbuttoned, his hand warm against hers. "Hard to believe it's the same place," she said softly. "It ain't," he replied. "Was just land before. Now it's home." The wind carried their laughter across the valley. Snowmelt glittered like glass, and the ranch that had once been a monument to solitude now pulsed with quiet life. That night, as the last snowflakes drifted down, she stood with him on the porch. The world lay still and luminous, the air scented with pine and promise. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned into him, her voice a whisper. "I never thought kindness could last." He looked down at her, eyes soft. "It can. You just have to find someone stubborn enough to keep giving it." The snow fell slower then, lazy and silver in the lamplight. For the first time in her life, Evelyn didn't flinch from tomorrow. The silence that stretched between them wasn't empty, it was full, a promise carved in the language of the wind, and though either spoke of love, both understood it had already taken root, quiet and sure as spring beneath the thawing ground.